Disney destroyed Pixar LGBT staff, overworked them, paid no bonuses, then fired them. I can't say for sure this is the same staff that insisted that no matter what corporate said, they needed to have that lesbian kiss in Buzz Lightyear's movie, Lightyear, that failed tremendously and cost Pixar a ton of money, damaging the Toy Story franchise, but it sure seems like they probably are. From Breitbart, Disney tried to make Inside Out 2 less gay after Lightyear flopped. Disney reportedly made a conscious effort to make Pixar's Inside Out 2 less gay, following the box office failure of Lightyear, with studio executives blaming the latter movie's much-discussed same-sex kiss for turning away audiences. Even if the kiss wasn't in there, it wasn't a good movie, but this was done also very publicly as a pushback against the state of Florida, so it was directly involved in pushing politics on people. Parents that take kids to see a movie don't want to be part of this social justice agenda. They don't want to normalize people's lifestyles. They just want to go for entertainment and bring their kids to see something that's not going to affect their kids in a way that the parents are not comfortable with. And here's the result of making Inside Out 2 less gay. It was a box office hit, bringing in more than $652 million domestically this summer, and $1 billion internationally, making Inside Out 2 the biggest animated movie ever. Multiple sources told IGN that Disney leadership internally put a large part of the blame on Lightyear's financial failure on a lesbian kiss, which was briefly removed then restored after an internal staff rebellion. If you have an internal staff rebellion and you're able to push the company to do something that they said they weren't going to do, that's a big problem for the company because it sets an example, not just at your company, but a company like Disney has a lot of different divisions. In all of their divisions, it signals, look, just push back on the company, abuse your power, force the company to do something the company knows they really ought not to be doing, putting the entire company in jeopardy to protect your agenda. LGBT employees at Pixar reportedly sent a letter to Disney leadership accusing them of censoring overtly gay affection at a time where employees were also protesting Florida's Parental Rights in Education bill, which protects public school students from radical gender theory, including transgenderism and other forms of LGBT indoctrination. Lightyear ended by flopping badly, grossing $118 million domestically when it was released in 2022. Disney apparently learned its lesson, with executives reportedly taking an active role in the development of Inside Out 2. Multiple sources told IGN they recall hearing about continuous notes to make Riley, the main character of both Inside Out movies, come across as less gay, leading to numerous edits that ramped up around September 2023 after the resolution of the Hollywood writers' strike. Sources also describe rumors that there was special care put into making the relationship between Riley and Val, a supporting character introduced in Inside Out 2, seem as platonic as possible, even requiring edits to the lighting and some certain scenes to remove any trace of romantic chemistry. And according to this IGN article, a lot of the people who were forced to make those changes are the people that they fired. One source told IGN it was like just doing a lot of extra work to make sure that no one would potentially see them as not straight. How humiliating for the people pushing this agenda, when all they're really concerned about is their identity and pushing their agenda and making sure everyone is involved in their identity, and look what happens. You get forced to clean up your own mess, and then you lose your job. Lightyear isn't the only Disney animated movie to flop in recent years. Disney's Strange World, which was also released in 2022, featured a gay teen protagonist. The animated feature was an even bigger box office bust than Lightyear, grossing just $31 million domestically. Disney has lost hundreds of millions of dollars on trying to push this kind of stuff. Really, it could be closer to $1 billion. But the effect on their brand has been dramatically bad. When you take it all into account, it's definitely in the billions. The Walt Disney Company has come under fire in recent years for putting LGBT messaging in its entertainment aimed at children. Disney fought Florida over its anti-grooming parental rights in education law, creating multiple transgender characters for its children's shows, put gay characters at the center of its big-budget movies, and even launched an LGBT-themed apparel line. Last year, Disney CEO Bob Iger laid off 7,000 workers worldwide as the company's financials tanked. Disney is still laying off employees this year, including at ABC News and other TV properties. And from IGN, Inside Out 2 was the hit Pixar needed, but the laid-off employees who crunched on it are still hurting. And when they say crunched on it, they mean to say, we're told to work 7-day weeks for a month or 2 months to help make the deadline to get the movie finished. From the outside, Pixar's narrative is a clear story of redemption. After an undeniably tough few years, battered by COVID-19 theater shutdowns, 2 Hollywood strikes, and a couple of box office disappointments. And we know why those box office disappointments happened. And it wasn't about COVID-19. The sequel to Peter Docter's Oscar-winning 2015 blockbuster is Pixar's biggest hit in years, and it's not even close. Inside Out 2 isn't just Pixar's highest-grossing film. It's the highest-grossing animated film of all time. But for many of the workers behind Inside Out 2, its record-shattering success is more than a little bittersweet. The studio began layoffs affecting 175 workers, or 14% of its staff, in May. And not only are laid-off employees unable to benefit from a bonus for Inside Out 2's success, some are also recovering from what several sources describe as an unprecedented crunch surrounding Inside Out 2. They're still recovering from their production work of having to work 7 days a week. Now look, working 7 days a week is a difficult job, but it does happen when you're trying to make a production deadline. It's not that unusual for people to actually have to do overtime to try to get their work done. For the people that are not really there for the work, but they're there to push an agenda, they weren't happy to have to be forced to come into work and actually do difficult work for a period of 2 months or less. Fortunately for them, they got laid off afterwards, so they could then take all their free time and relax. But I think for a month or two, the animators were working 7 days a week, one source says. Ridiculous amounts of production workers, just people being tossed into jobs they'd never really done before. It was horrendous. And that kind of complaining is the kind of complaining that gets you fired, because when you're a company and you're making productions and you have lots and lots of challenges, the people that complain about having to just do the work so that the work can go out the door are the ones that you're not trying to get revenge on. You just need to know who you can count on so you can produce work that your customers are going to be satisfied with. So whoever was out there complaining, 99% chance is not at the company anymore. IGN spoke to 10 former Pixar employees for this story under the condition of anonymity. They go into detail about the pains of the layoffs, the financial struggles those layoffs have left them with, and the details behind what one source calls the largest crunch in the studio's history. It's a claim disputed by a senior executive at Pixar who tells IGN that the crunch at the end of Inside Out 2 was no different from those on many other films from the studio. But the fact remains, there are many who feel like they rushed to give Pixar the hit it so desperately needed and were hung out to dry. We all know Inside Out 2 is a hit, but we also know it wasn't a hit because of these people being forced to do things they didn't want to do for 7 days a week. It was because it was the Pixar brand's promise being kept to the customers. Inside Out 2 was a normal movie for normal people and anyone else that wanted to watch it. It wasn't the kind of propaganda nonsense that got Pixar in trouble in the first place. Quote, I would venture to say that at least 95% of the people that got laid off are financially effed right now, one person says. Outside of the financial strain of it all, sources also paint a picture of a studio that's terrified to rock the boat, with some internally pushing to avoid LGBT themes, requiring edits to Inside Out 2. Well, they tried it, and you saw how badly it worked, not just for Pixar, but also for Disney's brand, and what they did with Marvel was completely absurd, and now Disney's kind of understood they can't just trust the, quote, creative people. They need to produce things that people want to see. It's a studio, they say, that's overly reliant on Chief Creative Officer Peter Docter, stubbornly set in its ways, and setting its remaining team up for more crunch time in its future films. When they're talking about crunch time, they seem to literally be talking about having to work overtime for a few weeks in a row to try to get a deadline done for an important production for the company. That's not like the end of the world. Quote, the internal culture of Pixar right now is really tough, one former employee says. There's just an incredible amount of people who are like, I can't do this anymore. Well, but they are showing up to work if they still work at Disney's Pixar, and then they could stop doing it, but basically you have a few of these people still floating around that they haven't gotten around to getting rid of yet or haven't quit yet because they know this is a miracle job for them to have. They're not going to get it replaced. As one of them quoted themselves, 95% of them are in serious financial trouble because no one else will hire them. Some former employees go so far as to say they believed Pixar would fall apart if Inside Out 2 wasn't a runaway success. It was seen by many employees as a life or death situation for the studio. Quote, "That was the pressure felt by everybody," one source said. "We need this movie to succeed because we won't have a studio otherwise." And that is the pressure that everybody felt the whole time. Whether or not Pixar was actually in danger isn't confirmed, but in a Time interview just before the release of Inside Out 2, Peter Docter said, quote, "If this doesn't do well at the theater, I think it just means we're going to have to think even more radically about how we run our business." Pixar really couldn't afford to keep putting out one bomb after another because it becomes at some point like, why do we even have a separate Pixar office? You people are supposed to be your own little great cultural unit producing brilliant work that no one else in the world can produce. But if it all loses money, it's not going to exist as its own entity. Disney would have just folded something like this up into one of their other animation studios. Companies do things like that all the time. While Docter is publicly an executive producer of Inside Out 2, multiple sources say that he stepped in as an uncredited co-director, working heavily alongside credited director Kelsey Mann. In some ways, that move made sense to many. Docter, after all, co-wrote and directed the first Inside Out, in addition to boasting directing and story credits on beloved Pixar movies like Up, Wall-E, and Toy Story. But I mean, you saw the end result of that. Inside Out 2 made $1 billion at the box office, one person says, of Docter taking a larger role. That was a direct result of Pete's involvement. Pete's a genius. Nobody can dispute this. One source says the studio leans on Peter Docter to an unhealthy degree, and it's partially what leads to a situation like the crunch on Inside Out 2. Quote, "You cannot do anything without Pete. Literally nothing," one former employee says, and that creates a bottleneck. The bottleneck is probably something they created deliberately because they wanted to make sure, number one, everything was good. Everything was on brand. Everything was on target and was worth putting into a big budget movie. Secondly, when you see all the work that comes in, when you are the bottleneck overseeing production, it gives you a very strong sixth sense almost about who's doing what they're supposed to do and who isn't. I've not worked inside of Pixar. I don't exactly understand their production organizational structure, but I'm sure they work on teams. And I'm sure Peter Docter became quickly well aware of who was producing quality work and who wasn't, and who did comparatively the best work with limited resources. This is what happens when you really pay attention to what's going on and you say, no, everything's going to pass through me. I'll approve everything. I'll make sure everything is good. For many, it's also a symbol of Pixar holding fast to an internal culture that's stubbornly set in its ways, with an aversion to bringing on new directors and voices. We know what those directors and those voices want to say. No, they're not doing that. They tried that, and it was a disaster. It threatened the existence of Pixar itself. One source cites a period of time between 2020 and the release of Lightyear where the studio was more open to bringing in producers and creatives from outside its typical ranks, as well as greener filmmakers. Mann made his directorial debut on Inside Out 2, beginning development during that more experimental period in 2020. That brief period of willingness to experiment, however, didn't last, particularly after Lightyear's financial failure, sources say. Pixar lost the desire to take risks either in its creative appointments or in its story decisions. Even producing Inside Out 2 is a risk for Pixar. Inside Out 3 is probably not a risk for Pixar. Every decision that Pixar makes to produce one thing is a calculated risk, and that's the way it's supposed to be. It should look like it's going to please the customer and get a good return on investment. Pixar and no other business exists to provide opportunities for people to tell their stories from their voices and give them directorial chances. That's very nice, but no, they're not there to do that. And as soon as they tried doing it, they had one failure after another. There were many reasons why Lightyear disappointed at the box office: a confusing spin-off concept, a new voice for Buzz, and growing pains in going from Disney Plus back to theatrical. Also pushing that you're going to put your lesbian kiss in the movie, even though it was cut from the movie, because you need to show Florida and the rest of everyone else in the world how important it is to promote your agenda. We left that out of IGN, but that was the main reason. It wasn't the spin-off concept. People would have given that movie a try. You just can't tell people, listen, we're forcing you and your children to do this. People don't want to do that. They will not pay for it. Parents have proven that time and time again. And even regular adult moviegoers, they're not putting up with this anymore. Doctor even admitted that it prompted a lot of soul searching at the studio, citing some of Lightyear's conceptual and character issues. Multiple sources say that Disney leadership internally put a large part of the blame for Lightyear's financial failure on a same-sex kiss in the film. In a joint statement to Walt Disney Company leadership, LGBT workers and allies at Pixar said leadership was censoring overtly gay affection at a time where employees were also protesting the company's response to Florida's, quote, "Don't Say Gay" bill. Quote, "It is, as far as I know, still a thing where leadership, they'll bring up Lightyear specifically and say, oh, Lightyear was a financial failure because it had a queer kiss in it," one source tells IGN. That's not the reason the movie failed. Yeah, that is the reason the company was failing, not just this movie. That was the reason that people were on social media and directly commenting, we will not go support Disney on any level. We won't go to the theme parks. We won't watch their movies. We won't watch their TV shows. We won't subscribe to their streaming services. It literally is the reason. Trying to push your agenda and say it needs to be pushed and you need to pay for this is not going to cause people to pay for it. It's going to cause people to not even boycott, just reject it and say, I'm not interested in this. I'll spend my money somewhere else. Now, Doctor largely uses the language of making universal stories, which to him means something that's very homogenous that anyone can relate to, one source says. Yeah, the largest relatable audience is what you want when you're selling entertainment. You can do a niche-oriented product if you're in that business. Pixar is not in that business. You can't sell over $1 billion worth of movie tickets for something that's to a niche audience. Pixar released a short in 2015 that followed Riley from Inside Out 2 on her first date with a boy. Still, many fans online started to call out queer coding in Inside Out 2 from the moment the first trailer arrived. The movie also teased a deep, dark secret that Riley was harboring throughout, only to reveal in the post-credits scene that this secret was she once burned a hole in the carpet. Many fans, however, thought the reveal would be that Riley was actually grappling with her sexuality, and even felt baited over what it actually was. Quote, mind you, it's not canonically gay, one source says. In the film, what you saw, nothing about Riley says that she's gay, but it is kind of inferred based on certain contexts. And so that's something that they tried to play down at multiple points. Another source calls some leadership uncomfortable with queer themes at large, and the insistence of keeping those themes out of Inside Out 2 was a big thing throughout development. And while not everyone did the 7-day weeks on Inside Out 2 to finish the movie, what struck many of their sources is how many people who did were affected by the layoffs earlier this year. At the very least, the fact that Pixar was having layoffs at some point wasn't a huge shock to its staff. Employees were told layoffs would be happening at some point in January 2023, and Disney announced a strategic realignment that would include layoffs of 7,000 people from the company at large. 75 Pixar employees were laid off in June of that year. Some sources expected more layoffs in September 2023, but theorized those layoffs were pushed back due to the amount of work that still needed to be done on Inside Out 2 after the summer strikes. Quote, for a good year and a half, everyone was on edge, one source says. I think that's maybe why they had their heads down and just worked as hard as they could. Instead, the layoffs of 14% of Pixar's workforce began in late May, after much of the work on Inside Out 2 was complete. The layoffs, Doctor said in a recent interview with The Ankler, were another thing that made this year really weird. Unfortunately, now Disney has come to the point where they realized, you know what? The amount we have to spend to do the quality we do doesn't make sense. Though expected, the news was a blow for many employees, at least in part because they would not receive a bonus for Inside Out 2's eventual success. To qualify for the bonus, an employee would have had to work on a project for a certain amount of time and be employed at the time when the bonuses are distributed. Quote, to be told by our HR reps that we were not going to qualify for that bonus felt like an ultimate FU from Disney, one former employee says. Yeah, that is an FU from Disney, and they could have certainly made an exception here. And the reason they didn't make the exception is because of what you people, and whoever you are, you know who you are, because of what you people did with Lightyear, and because of what you did before that. You should not have forced the issue with Lightyear. The company didn't have a choice. They had to go along with you or deal with some gigantic revolt. So you got what you wanted. Now Disney gets what they want. One of the major reasons the bonus was important, multiple sources say, is because Pixar's base pay for many positions is considered low for Emeryville, California, an expensive Bay Area city where many of them were required to live. It's worth noting, too, that unlike much of California's animation business, Pixar employees are not unionized under the Animation Guild. The short explanation for why that is, Pixar opened as an independent studio in Emery, California in 1986. Its location put it outside of their jurisdiction of Los Angeles County, making it non-union from the start. Being acquired by Disney in 2006 did not automatically place Pixar under the union's umbrella, even though Walt Disney Animation workers are represented by the union. Pixar workers could, in theory, join the union, although it would take a formal organizing effort and an election. Quote, and the way they kind of excuse that is with these bonuses. They're like, yeah, we pay less, but here's this huge bonus you might get, one source said. Other sources say it's something that frequently comes up when talking to Pixar's recruiters and in offer letters. Well, we work all year for that bonus, another says. That is what partially makes working at Pixar worth it. We depend on that. Depending on a project's success, along with other factors like whether or not it came in under budget, those bonuses can range from 1 week to 10 weeks' pay. Given Inside Out 2's record-breaking success, the bonus will likely be on the higher end for those eligible to receive it. Many employee sources say we're counting on the bonus for Inside Out 2, especially since the bonuses were lower for Elemental and non-existent for Lightyear. Well, they were because you guys pushed this agenda and you destroyed the company. So when the company doesn't make money, you're not going to get bonuses. And when you're responsible for pushing what they pushed with Lightyear and Elemental as well, you're going to pay the price. And this is the price they had to pay. No job, no bonus. But if they had just tacked on something to the severance of those who were being let go, that was like, oh, here's a prorated bonus. It feels like something that could have been done out of kindness to me, one person says. I think it would have gone a very long way in their claims of trying to be compassionate and kind to colleagues that have to leave. Quote, it really crushed a lot of us, another adds. When we were told the day we were laid off that the bonus was only for active employees, I sobbed. Sources describe it as yet another gut punch when the news of the layoffs came down. How did corporate feel when you told corporate, oh, no, LGBT is more important than the company. It's more important than the Toy Story brand. There has to be a lesbian kiss in Lightyear. We insist on it. We'll ruin your company. You depend on us. We'll figure out how to stop your company if you don't do what we say. And Disney was forced to capitulate. And now they get their compensation for that. And you gotta know this affects people who were not involved in pushing that agenda. People are laid off that just did their job, worked hard, didn't complain, but because of other troublemakers, they lost their opportunity and lost a lot of money. Quote, the day that the layoffs happened was like a funeral. There was weeping and crying in the atrium, one source says. There are images from that day that are going to stay with me for a long time. When the list of those who were laid off from the studio started to form, more confusion and frustration abounded. For one, at the time, Pixar said it was refocusing away from streaming content and back to theatrical films as the reason for the cuts, having staffed up for the former during the pandemic. But some of those affected by the layoff, sources say, had nothing to do with the content produced for Disney+, with the layoffs reaching departments that only worked on theatrical. Additionally, no one on the executive team was let go. Quote, it was just a great group of people that got laid off, to be honest, said one person. It was almost like they laid off so many of the really loyal, nice, lovely, talented people of Pixar. Quote, Disney invested $1.5 billion in Fortnite, one former employee laments. 1% of that $1.5 billion would have saved all our jobs. The way the layoffs unfolded, too, left those affected scrambling. Specifically, Pixar locked affected employees out of the network the day of the layoffs, cutting off access to work materials for demo reels, personal files, benefit information, and more. Even keycard access was restricted outside of normal workweek hours, and laid-off employees were asked not to visit the office to pick up their belongings during those times so as not to make the remaining employees feel awkward. While this behavior might be common at other companies, it was not standard practice at Pixar, multiple sources say, and left many of those affected feeling suddenly exiled and blindsided. Pixar did establish a system where laid-off employees could request material for their reels, but perhaps the shutout was more significant for symbolic reasons. One former employee remembers crying at the gates of the studio feeling completely shut out physically, not just network-wise, just physically shut out without any communication. Quote, there was no one from HR or anything supporting us or guiding us. It was all mixed messaging, and that was super frustrating and emotional and just adding to the whole stress of all of it. In the meantime, the former employees were left to watch as Inside Out 2 became a runaway global success. One person there at the time says the studio felt out of touch with how they celebrated its blockbuster box office while those who worked on it were on the way out. Another laid-off employee recalls getting asked by industry colleagues about their potential bonus, given Inside Out 2's now hit status, only to relay that they wouldn't be getting one at all. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.